Welcome to the debate. Our focus today is, well, a really fundamental tension in how we practice Stoicism now in the modern era. It's something highlighted in recent discussions around citizenship, resilience, and personal discipline. We're really tackling the core responsibility of the Stoic citizen.
Right. And the question we need to wrestle with is this. What's the primary duty? Is it that big outward ethical commitment, citizenship and universal love, that outward path?
Or is it the rigorous day-to-day inward discipline of moderation and temperance, that kind of internal architecture?
Exactly.
I'm going to argue that the expansive commitment, the universal love and cosmopolitanism, well, that provides the non-negotiable moral purpose. It's the organizing principle for really all Stoic practice.
And I come at it from a slightly different angle. While I agree that ultimate purpose defines the scope of our virtue, I argue that the daily, frankly difficult, foundational work, moderation, character building, that's the essential precondition. Without truly mastering that internal management, those grand ideals of citizenship, they become fragile, inconsistent, and ultimately, I think, unreachable.
Okay, I see why you think that, but let me offer a different view on what the highest calling really is. My core thesis is simply that the Stoic life is defined by this principle of universal citizenship, and it's guided, inexorably by love. As Scott Corey outlined in his recent work, the ethical core demands we embrace our circumstances and our companions, driven by a deep acceptance. This is really the meaning behind that famous advice from Marcus Aurelius. Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together with all of your heart. Now, that instruction doesn't suggest self-management is the end goal, right? It's a man's an expansive love, a love that radiates outward. And this ethical scope, it's mapped out through the 6 concentric circles of care. It's a model that starts with the self, sure, but then moves out through family, community, nation, and ultimately all the way out to all humanity and even the universe. And forgiveness. Forgiveness is the central mechanism of this love. It applies to others, yes, but also crucially to oneself when we falter. Without this kind of moral direction, discipline is just aimless. Seneca was very clear. There is no wind favorable for the sailor that has no direction. That direction, that ultimate purpose, it has to be universal love.
That's a compelling argument about the necessary direction. I'll grant you that. But if we agree the vessel needs to go somewhere, doesn't the immediate state of the vessel itself dictate whether the journey is even possible? I'm convinced that if the internal vessel is constantly leaking, if we're continually failing at basic self-management, then the destination becomes almost irrelevant. The internal discipline of moderation is the necessary and often really difficult work required to ensure a sustainable journey toward virtue. Christy's research into modern Stoic application, it confirms this challenge. She observed that the kind of people often drawn to philosophy are intense, highly driven individuals, yet they consistently struggle most with temperance. It makes it arguably the hardest Stoic discipline. Abstract intentions, or just a feeling of universal love, well, they're simply insufficient when you're faced with immediate, physiological urges, the desire for overindulgence, or distraction, or, anger.
Right.
So, true temperance, it requires practical, daily application, a kind of internal engineering almost. We have to leverage our modern understanding of habit science, using proactive tools like naming impressions, explicitly labeling an impulse as, oh, that's appetite, or that's anger. Doing that reduces our reliance on finite, exhaustible willpower. Now, if you skip this rigorous groundwork, you risk exactly the outcome Christy warns about. Stoicism just devolves into a cycle of self-punishment when inevitable failures happen. And that undermines any capacity to act effectively as a steady, reliable citizen.
Okay, this brings us right to the core disagreement, doesn't it? The primacy of internal control versus external duty. You're suggesting internal control has to come first, prioritizing managing those immediate urges. But I have to press you on this. Control for what purpose? I mean, if Stoicism is truly a framework for controlling our response, as the dichotomy of control instructs, then surely that response must be fundamentally oriented toward our highest moral duty, which is defined by our relationship to the cosmos and our fellow citizens.
Well,
Look, I grant that daily self-management, like pre-deciding limits on consumption, that's useful engineering. But if that internal control is totally divorced from the ethical organizing principle of cosmopolitanism, it risks becoming just optimized self-interest. It becomes a health regimen, maybe, or an aesthetic preference, not a virtuous ethical practice. If I only moderate my anger so that I feel better, that's just self-optimization. The Stoic virtue demands I moderate my anger so I can respond justly and lovingly to others within those circles of care. Corey's model ensures discipline serves the larger goal of humanity. It's the means, not the end itself.
I just don't buy that the means can be treated as secondary when the difficulty of those means is precisely what causes the whole ethical system to break down for people. You ask, control for what purpose? The purpose is psychological reliability. It's resource management.
How can a person commit consistently to the complexity and the constant demands of those outer circles of care, which involve, let's face it, constant forgiveness, outreach, dealing with difficult people, if their basic internal resources are constantly depleted? The failure to maintain simple temperance creates this constant psychological drain, often a sense of shame. This internal instability makes any external ethical demands inconsistent. It renders the person, well, hypocritical, or at least ineffective in their duties. If I can't control my temper over some minor frustration, how on earth can I sustain the effort needed for real civic engagement or universal forgiveness? The internal has to be stabilized before the external framework can be reliably built on it. And that stability, that comes through daily moderation.
That is a powerful argument about psychological drain, and it forces us to look closely at, well, the necessary element of grace. Let's turn to forgiveness for a moment, because here, I think the primacy of love is just undeniable.
Okay.
You and I both agree, and the source material from both Corey and Christy confirms this, that self-forgiveness and self-compassion are absolutely essential. This is our point of convergence, yes? But it also proves my point. Love is the necessary element of grace that prevents the entire rigorous system from collapsing into, well, nihilism or just giving up. If we're truly aiming for moral growth, forgiveness is the great Stoic act of love. It resets the clock. It allows the individual to keep pursuing that ethical direction. If we prioritize rigor, the mechanical maintenance of your vessel, over grace, the system fails the very first moment an intense person fails their pre-decided limits. The discipline is futile if the overall commitment is abandoned because of shame. Love sustains the commitment to the path itself.
I agree that self-compassion is the life raft, absolutely, but we have to ask why the life raft is so desperately needed in the first place. The necessity of radical self-compassion arises precisely because the rigor of moderation is so profoundly demanding. Christy highlights self-compassion as an under-discussed concept in Stoicism. Why would it be under-discussed? Because the daily struggle for temperance inherently involves constant failure and relapse for most people. If moderation were simple, or automatic, or secondary, forgiveness wouldn't need to be so explicitly argued for as a core concept. The constant, gnawing need for forgiveness highlights the constant difficulty inherent in that internal battle, which to me proves it is the primary enduring challenge. And moreover, let's reconsider Benny's example of resilience. He describes confronting a difficult colleague using Marcus Aurelius's insight. That person is bound to act that way. Okay, this framework transformed his frustration into understanding and resilience. But what was the action item? It wasn't an outward act of community engagement or moral correction within the circle of care. It was intense internal discipline, control over his own emotional reaction. He prioritized the temperance of his emotion, managing his judgment and impulse over any external duty to correct or challenge the person. That required masterful self-management first. And that's a concrete example of internal control taking precedence over external action.
I find that reading of Benny's resilience compelling. I do. But I believe we might be missing the context of that internal discipline. Even the act of internal restraint you describe, it's ultimately guided by the ethical mandate of cosmopolitanism.
We exercise patience. We accept the difficult colleague precisely because they are part of the larger human community we are bound to serve and forgive and coexist with. It's an act of internal virtue, yes, but in service of external coexistence. Let's look at the practicality of our frameworks. You argue for the clear, actionable nature of moderation, habit design, pre-deciding limits. And I grant that these steps concretely align one's environment with a desired state. But how is that state defined as virtuous in the Stoic sense?
Well, by leading to better outcomes.
But the organizing principle provided by universal love and citizenship, Seneca's destination, right, that has to be established first. Without that overarching goal of caring for the universe, moderation can easily become a narrow, self-serving practice, a way to fit into clothes better maybe, or optimize productivity, detached from the broader and often painful ethical demands of Stoic philosophy. The discipline of self-control is merely a tool. If I am the sailor, I need to know where I'm sailing before I meticulously patch the sails. The purpose must precede the engineering.
See, the problem with prioritizing purpose over platform is that the platform, the daily practice, is the only element that guarantees success on a day-to-day basis. It creates the reliable character necessary for effective citizenship. That grand vision of universal love, it requires robust, predictable mental strength, and that strength is forged in the small, difficult, daily victories over impulse. If I consistently fail to moderate my consumption, I become lethargic, unreliable. I'm incapable of showing up properly for my community or my family. The philosophical ideal of love doesn't magically provide the willpower to overcome a bad habit. Habit science does. The daily success of temperance builds the character, and that character allows us to consistently serve the grand ideal. If you don't have the internal stability, the external duty just becomes moral pretense. Saying you love humanity while being unable to restrain your temper with your own family.
Ultimately, I maintain that true Stoic living must embrace the expansive ethical horizon of cosmopolitanism. Love provides the essential direction, the ultimate scope. It ensures that our discipline serves humanity and the universe rather than merely the self. It is the compass that keeps the vessel on its virtuous course.
And I insist that the most constant, the most difficult, and really the most fundamental work is that internal discipline of temperance and habit science. Without this foundational moderation, without the ability to reliably manage our own impulses and reactions, those grand ideals of citizenship remain fragile. They're vulnerable to constant personal failure and the resulting psychological fatigue. It is the robust foundation upon which all reliable virtue must ultimately rest.
It seems the material really reveals that modern Stoic practice requires a delicate, maybe a constant, balance between these two forces. We need the outward moral expansion of love, yes, and we absolutely need the inward, disciplined self-management of moderation. The ultimate framework, as we've explored today, seems to demand both clear direction and a strong, stable foundation if we are truly to succeed in transforming our individual struggles into meaningful purpose.